Hello, I'm Anna, the Yarn Randomizer, and today I want to go through the process of picking up the stitches, for example, from a sleeve on a sweater where you've done a reverse loop cast on to add the stitches for the underarm. Now, this sweater is a little unusual in that I have some eyelets here near right at the cast on, but you can see here, for example, in the reverse cast on, you can see how you have this kind of bump here and you have the kind of cast on stitch there. And I'm going to show you how I've started casting these on. Now, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'm going to start right here in what should be the center of the sleeve. Grab some yarn. Now, what I want you to see is usually when I've picked up these stitches, I have gone into, I can see, for example, this loop here. I would typically kind of look at this column and go into here. You can see I'm going under 2 stitches there. I'm at the top of this set of V's here, and I would simply pick up the stitch, this stitch at the top of the column in this way. Now, one of the things that happens is this little part of the backwards loop cast on will sometimes stick out after you do that, and you kind of have to tuck them in after the fact. Well, I experimented recently with not only going through these pair of stitches, these 2 things here at the top of this column, but I've experimented with going through this lump that's usually here, this little extra bump, and then going through the stitches at the top. So I've got 3, I've got that bump, and I've got the 2 strands at the top of that stitch there. And this can get a little fiddly getting all of these over this. Let's get this here. I'm going to pull that through, and it's going to easily pull through the first 2, and typically I'll just pull this last one over by hand. There we go. Being a little rough on that. Did I get that all the way over? I think so. Well, actually, let me redo that. All right, so I'm going under the bump and then under those 2 strands at the top of that column. Then I'm going to pull that through and then kind of pull this stitch over that. There we go, that's better. And I'm going to continue this all the way across. So here's the top of this column here is these 2 stitches right here, these 2 strands. But I'm going to pick up this bump here also. Sometimes these can be a little snug. I'm going to slip through there. And then underneath those top 2 stitches, again, make sure I'm working with the working end of the yarn. I'm going to pull those through. And then I'm going to pull that, what was that little bump, over that stitch. Did I get all of that correctly? I think so. There we go. All right, now this yarn over here is a little bit, there's actually a bump here. Let me redo that again. Go under there, and under these 2 parts of the stitch at the top, pull this through, and then pull this, the bump stitch, the bump strand over. There we go. All right. Now this is an unusual situation. I've got this yarn over here, and there actually that bump exists here as well. It's right there. So I'm going to do this here. Normally you wouldn't have this kind of situation in one of these cast-ons. All right, let me pull this out here. Oh, stay back there. All right, now I'm going to pull this through, and I'm going to pull this bump stitch over this. There we go. All right, continue doing this along. Okay, here is the column again here, coming up here. Here's these two strands at the top of that column of stitches, and here's the corresponding bump. So I am going to get underneath that little bump. I'm gonna have to get a closer look at this. I'll put my glasses down over here. All right, now working with that yarn. All right, here is that little bump here. I'm going to work underneath that. There we are. Okay, so now we're underneath that bump, and now I'm going to get underneath these two strands at the top of this column, pull that through, and then I'm going to pull this bump stitch over again. There we go. Now, got a few more to do, and I'll work through each of these so you can see it. Again, here's the two stitches at the top of this column here. Here's that bump that's there from the reverse loop cast on through. Make sure I'm just picking up two stitches at the top there. All right, and then pull that stitch over. All right, and now I'm going to redo that one. Again, I'm going to get under this bump that looks clean, and under these two strands here. Okay, pull that through, and then pull that over. All right, and now here's the next column here. And there's the two stitches at the top of the column, the two strands at the top. And now I'm going to get underneath this little bump of a stitch, get underneath those two strands. And I'm going to pull this over. There might be better ways to do this, but this is what I've figured out for now. Here's this column again, and there's the two strands at the top, and there is the bump, a little bit of blue there. Okay, through that, and then underneath these two strands at the top, pull these over. All right, now I believe I've got one more column here. Again, there's the two strands at the top. Here's the bump. I am going to, have I got that? Yes, I've got that correctly. And now to get the two strands at the top. Again, I'll pull this bump stitch over. All right, now I'm on to the rest of the sleeves, and there's some really good videos out there for how to minimize having a gap here. I'm going to pause this for a moment, and then I will, when I get back around to the other side, I'll show the other side of this. All right, I have made my way all the way around the sleeve, and I'm ready to pick up, I believe it's 7 more stitches across the top of this armhole cast on. And so again, I'm going to look at my column of stitches here. I see the top of that column there. Then I have this little bump here, and I'm going to get underneath that, make sure I get all the way underneath that strand. I think one of the problems I have here is this yarn's just a little on the splitty side, as you can see. Going through. Now I'm going to pull over this strand. It might have helped if I had longer fingernails right now, but I trimmed them pretty short the other day. All right, so there's one. Here's the next column here. Here's the bump. Here's the top of that stitch column again. Here is the bump that I want to get underneath. Weave through, there we go. All right. And here, let me pause this video for a moment. All right, we're back after a brief interruption. All right. And now I'm trying to remember where I was at, so I'm going to slip that. Okay, there we are. We're in this next stitch column here. Let me get back centered under here. And I want to make sure I get under these two strands at the top of that column. But I also want to catch this bump. So sometimes these things can be a little tricky there. Okay, that looks good. Now to get under here. Oh, that looks like it's splitting that back stitch. There. That's better. Pull that through. And again, I'm going to pull this one over. There. Okay. Now, this is a case where I have this yarn over here, but it still has this little bump type stitch here, part of the construction. So I'm going to get under there and under here. Pull this over. And then pull this stitch over. Then, okay, on the other side here, so you can see where this was the original column where the yarn over happened. This is the column next to it. This is where I want to go next. I need to get under this bump here. This one's being a little trickier. I think that's cleanly enough. There's under those two stitches at the top of the column. All right. I'm going to pull that over. Oop. Well, it doesn't help if you've lost the stitch there. Let's get that back through there. There. Through the bump, underneath those two strands at the top of the column. Pull it through. And then there we go. Okay, that's good. I feel like I'm showing this in one of the worst case scenarios, a speckled yarn, a somewhat splitty yarn, and everything, but we've just got a little ways to go. So that's that column. Now I've got this column. Here's the two stitches at the strands at the top. Here is the the bump part. And I'm going to try to work that through there. Here. There we go. That gets that there. Now under those two strands, okay, pull that through. Looks like we've got 1, 2, 3 more to go. Do them all the way through. Okay, so here's this column here of stitches. Here are the two strands at the top of that column. Here's that little bump. And make sure this is visible. There, okay, there we go. And underneath those two, through, over, 2 more to go. Here's this column here. Here are the two strands at the top. Here's this bump here. And then under the two strands at the top, pull it through. And pull that little bump over there. Now I got 1 more to go. Here is my last column of stitches. Here's the two strands at the top of that column. And here is the little bump. Got that. Pull that through. All right. And pull that over. All right. And that's that. So that is, now you can take a look and see how this looks. I think it looks a lot cleaner than if you don't pick up that bump. Pick this up a little bit. Here you can see it here as well. And I want to show you it in another circumstance. Let me spread this out a little bit here. I had a vest I completed recently, and I used the same technique on the underarm, so I wanted to show you what that looked like, if I can figure out even where. Oh yeah, so here, so I mean, you can't even see that in the middle of this here were these reverse loop cast-ons here where I picked up with this technique. I feel like it looks really clean. And similarly on this sweater, I believe at the top, let me see if I can find this for you. Here we go. At the top here, where there was reverse loop cast-ons along here as well at this top edge, again, I feel like it's come out cleaner than it does when I pick up the normal way where I just pick up through the two strands. So that, and again, just as much as like Elizabeth Zimmerman says, how you unvent techniques and everything, this is probably an existing technique that somebody knows, but it was something I fiddled around with on the past 2 projects, and I'm really happy with the results that it produces. So I hope that was helpful, and if you found it helpful, give me a like and subscribe if you're interested in watching more of these videos or some of my regular podcasts. But in the meantime, enjoy your knits.